I'm going to sort of introduce myself first so you get a bit of an idea of who I am. My name's Shamil Aloprado. Aloprado in Portuguese means a bit crazy. That's my capoeira name, so I'm sticking with that for now. I teach capoeira, which is a African-Brazilian martial art that was developed by slaves in Brazil. And I'm also the vocalist for a band called Fundamental, which is like a Sufi punk rock band. I'm feminist, as best as I can be. I'm also very much against homophobia and any kind of discrimination towards any particular group in society, apart from Nazis. I don't care about Nazis. You can do what you want to them. Yeah? And also, which is, I'm going to discuss it later, I'm absolutely against speciesism, which is something we're going to talk about later, yeah? Okay, so to begin with, disclaimers, yeah? I'm not a scholar, right? But I have studied Islam for quite a number of years, but I'm nowhere in the realms of being a scholar. And the other thing is I do not agree with quoting Scripture. I mean, I don't believe that you should quote ayahs or hadiths and things like that unless you're a scholar and you've been through the system of being a murid, studied for years, and being given permission, or in Arabic is ijaza, to speak. The reason for this system that was set up in classical Islam, I'm not talking about neo-modernist, neo-Salafist, whatever Islam, where everybody, becomes an internet da'i and, starts crying when they say sisters without hijab and stuff. I'm talking about, yeah. No, there was actually a guy who was crying on stage because apparently he saw sisters without hijab and he was so upset about it. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing, yeah. So, yeah, I believe the classical system of you studied under a scholar, and often, historically, those scholars were women, and men studied under women as well. And you studied for decades sometimes, and when the scholar felt that you were ready to go into society and talk about the deen, then you were given ijaza, permission. And the permission was almost like a qualification. So in my opinion, it's like a doctor. You'd only trust a doctor that's been through medical school, he's passed his exams, yeah? And then you would go to him and trust his opinion. You would not trust the opinion of somebody that's read a few medical books, right? And thinks they can correct you by clicking your neck a few times, right? So that's my opinion on quoting from the Quran and Hadith. And the reason for that is because Islam as a deen can be used for positivity, but it can be used for oppression. And it's often used for oppression. In the modern times, it's used a lot by people to oppress others or to deen shame people. Deen shaming is when you see somebody and rather than see any positive attributes of them, you just look to try and rip them apart. Okay? So finally, the other part of the disclaimer is this is just my opinion. I'm nobody, yeah? So it's just an opinion of mine regarding whether that we as Muslims should not eat meat. Okay, and finally, my opinion on Islam. Islam is a deen of guidance. It's not a deen of rules. Rules can always be broken or bent or twisted to whatever desire that you want. You can twist rules all the time. Classical scholars have twisted Islamic rules. I just told a brother before about Imam Hanifa. When he was he came up with the opinion that only alcohol that came from tamir, which is dates, and grapes was forbidden. That other alcohol was allowed. And then Muslims at the time that were under Imam Hanifa drank beer freely. Yeah? So that's how easily you can, change rules to suit you. Islam is a religion of guidance. Guidance is different from rules. Once you're guided, yeah, then your faith is much stronger than believing that you're brought up with a set of rules that you're scared of breaking, which most Muslims do break. Yeah, I had a really good conversation with Brother Shannon over there about Muslim attitudes towards homosexuality, and the fact that majority of Muslim men in the country that I come from, Kashmir, the first experience, if it's not with another man, it's with a farmyard animal. So, it exists. Yeah, so that's the difference between having rules and having guidance. Okay, so I did want to cause a bit of controversy with my statements, yeah. So now I'm going to go into why I stopped eating meat. So, around 8-9 years ago, I had a very difficult marriage with a sister. She was what I would say Salafi, basically, she was from Nigeria, she was a Salafi sister. But it didn't work out between us because she was like pretty much passed around by, anyway, it's another story, but I ended up getting depression from this really badly. So one day I was walking through an old schoolyard that had been converted into farms. And I was really down, and I was contemplating suicide and all the things that everybody does. And I wasn't contemplating suicide based on the fact that I was really sad. I just didn't want to be alive with those thoughts in my head all the time. And the animals, somebody left a gate open, and the animals ran out to sort of like, I felt they came out to comfort me. Now, normally, like, you expect it from some of the animals that you think are higher up on the scale, like sheep and things like that, they came out. But it was when the chickens came out and they were like going around my leg. And I thought they were looking for food, but they weren't looking for food. They actually wanted me to like stroke them, cuddle them. And that, for me, rightly or wrongly, opened something up. And these were like sentient creatures. These were animals that had feelings, and they could see that I was down. And they came to me. It could have been for other reasons, but for me, that was the reason. And then I went to visit Konya with the Muslim of Imam Rumi. And while I was there, I went to visit there's a graves of some Sahabi there. And at one of them, a cat had been run over by a car, and he'd found his way all the way into this tomb. And his jaw was broken, and it come there to die. It was very difficult for it to get into this tomb, but it come to die. And I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in front of me, the cat seemed to perk up, get better when it was on there, and it went off. And I thought that was very significant. And that cat stayed in my head for ages until I went on Hajj. And when I went on Hajj, it was not the greatest of experiences. And in the Haram, there was basically a cat walking around minding its own business, and an Arab guy just came past and kicked it out of the way. Yeah? And that I felt that was a sign as well. And then finally, sorry, don't mean to bore you, I went to Bosnia to visit some friends that I knew from during the war. And in Bosnia, there was a chicken farm. And it was basically a factory. And I could hear the chickens inside the factory crying and being really miserable and upset and terrified. And I felt it. And from that point on, I decided never to eat meat again. So that's my story of why I stopped eating meat. It's not for health reasons. It's not for any other reason, not even specifically Islamic reasons. The reason I stopped eating meat is because I feel that animals are sentient beings, and they feel like us, and they have a range of emotions, and it's not right for us, if we want to evolve in our consciousness, to kill something that loves its life just as much as we love our lives, right? So that's my opinion only, right? So, next part. Why I believe my faith says don't eat meat. Okay, so one is the example of our Prophet ﷺ. He only ate meat occasionally, and the recommendation was to eat once a month. At the time of the Prophet, meat was it was a luxury. People rarely ate, people ate once or twice a year. Yeah, the meat was like in a totally different dynamic than what exists now, and so I don't think like consuming like we do now is in the manner of the Prophet. Then, more significant than that, there's an ayah in the Quran, which I'm not, like I said, I don't quote ayahs, but it basically says that animals are like communities just like us. So in difference to other Abrahamic religions like Judeo-Christian tradition, is that human beings are like the highest level and animals here to serve us. But in the Quran it says that they're communities just like us. They exist as communities like us. So I believe the Quran is against speciesism. It doesn't distinguish between creation like we think it does. Maybe it made us custodians of the planet, but it doesn't make us superior to other creatures. Yeah? And I think that's a very significant thing. I think people should go out there and read about that themselves, yeah? And you know, come to their own conclusion. But once again, it says they are communities. The exact verse, I'll say roughly, is like, there's not a bird that flies or animal that walks around that do not have communities like you. And on the Day of Atonement, they shall all be gathered before their Lord. So we don't even believe, like Christians do, that animals have no souls. In our belief, animals are gathered before the Creator, right? And then there's a couple other things. There's one of the Sahabis said that meat is an addiction that you should avoid, like alcohol. And another one said that do not let your stomachs become graveyards. Right? So that's quite significant as well. It's like you're consuming death and your stomach becomes a graveyard. So now we're going to the subject of what a lot of people think is halal, which is not actually. It's actually the subject is about zabiyah, right? Now the question about zabiyah is quite complex as well, because technically you can eat meat from Christians, so you can just go into a supermarket and eat the meat. It says that in Surah Al-Maidah. I said I wouldn't quote, but I'm just letting you go and do your own research, yeah? It says you can eat the meat of the Jews and the Christians. Yeah, that's why you see some Arabs, they just go into Tesco's and say Bismillah and buy the meat, yeah? And actually, my auntie, she's from Hargeisa, and they do that as well. They just buy the meat. And I don't know. Anyway, so zabiyah, there's a criteria behind it, right? The animal cannot be stressed. It must face towards the Kaaba. It cannot see the knife coming to kill it. It cannot see the blood of the animals previous to it that have been slaughtered. And it must have been raised in a way that it had a chance to, live in a decent way, in a humane, what we call a humane way. That is impossible these days. Factory farming is completely haram on every level, right? You cannot justify that, yeah? Yet, that's where the majority of our meat comes from. And Muslims have the worst health of most communities. And I've just been told I've got 5 minutes left. Okay, so, sorry. Okay, so, anyway, the method of slaughter isn't correct either. But for me, none of these are valid reasons for giving up meat, right? Even though they're Islamic reasons. The reason for me is just one: justice. Yeah? Animals are oppressed. We oppress creatures that we share this planet with. By oppressing them, by destroying them, we're destroying ourselves. Even if you can't do it for the sake of other creatures that share this planet with us, you should think about the effect that it will have on ourselves as communities, and the environment. It destroys the environment, eating meat. You also, every time you eat a piece of meat, you are starving children in other countries, because a lot of the land that is used to grow meat for the West, yeah, is land that could be used to grow food for for poor people. And I'm rambling a little bit here. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. And the final. Sorry, how long have I got left? No. 1 minute. No. Oh my God. When you got a minute. Okay. All right. So, because I'm a Sufi, I believe Sufism is esoteric. It's looking for a connection between us and the Creator. I believe that fundamentalism, Wahhabism, whatever, is secular. It's the most secular of all the faiths, of all the sects of Islam, because they do not give God any legislation. They think that they have the right to take the legislation from the Creator and establish it on earth. That's secular. That's like man-made laws, right, from what your interpretation is. And interpretations differ, yeah? Islam is diverse. It's very, very diverse. I've traveled a lot. I've been lucky enough to travel all over the world, and you will never meet two, Muslims, right, that you pray in a similar way. There's so many different aspects to it, yeah? So, it's very important for us to realize that we come from a diverse faith. We're not like just one, You can't keep talking about Ummah and you won't stand next to a black brother in prayer. You know what I mean? This exists. Racism exists within Islam. Yeah? So we have to understand that. And going back to this, it's about justice. So stopping eating meat, the primary reason should be is that we should be a deen of justice, a deen of positivity, and we should have once again have a moral authority in this world. Like, people should look towards us. Like, even in my childhood, you should look towards Muslims and say, listen, mate, I might drink and go out, but at least you guys are better than us because you don't do any of that stuff. Nobody says that about us anymore. And I think that's it, really. I've rambled on non-stop, sorry.
No,
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair.